Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar, the final webinar of Azure Week. My name is Laura and I'm delighted to be joined by Dominik, who will present the topic, How to Get Started with Microsoft Sentinel, Best Practices from the Field. Remember to join in on the conversation about today's webinar and more on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC23. Don't forget to check out the Resource Centre. This is updated daily with the latest blogs, eBooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit sharepointeurope.com and click the Content tab at the top. Continue your learning by joining us for our next webinar, Build Resilient Apps with Microsoft Graph Developer Proxy, which takes place next Monday, July 24th from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. CEST. For full details, please check out sharepointeurope.com/register for webinars. You can now watch the European Power Platform Conference 2023 showreel video from Dublin last June. Last month, over 1,200 Power Platform professionals gathered in Dublin for the European Power Platform Conference 2023. Check out our amazing showreel video full of conference highlights from Dublin last month. This showreel is a brief extract of all the learning, development, networking, and fun that was had over the amazing 4-day event. And next year, we are taking the European Power Platform Conference to Brussels. So you can join over 1,500 of your professional peers and expect world-class expert guidance to help you succeed in your projects and your career. And of course, not to forget an unforgettable experience in the beautiful city of Brussels. Register your interest for the European Power Platform Conference next year in Brussels at sharepointeurope.com/European Power Platform Conference. Europe's premier Microsoft 365 and Azure Technologies Conference occurs this November 27th to the 30th in Amsterdam. With access to over 100 world-class speakers and over 120 expert sessions, there is endless knowledge to gain at ESPC 23. Microsoft technologies, as we know, are advancing rapidly, so stay in the know by attending ESPC and hear from the greatest on the very latest. Get your early bird discounted tickets for ESPC 23 in Amsterdam now. Join us and learn to better master Microsoft 365 and Azure at ESPC 23. And you can visit sharepointeurope.com to secure your tickets at this discounted price. So after the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any question that you might have into the questions window, and questions will be selected and answered at the end of the webinar. The webinar will also be recorded and added to the Resource Centre, where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to today's webinar presenter, Dominik. Hello, Dominik.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for the housekeeping and thanks for having me.
It's our pleasure.
So wonderful. Yeah, let me share my screen, and Laura, if you can confirm that you can now see my screen, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, we can see that.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So hi, also from my side, thanks everyone for joining the webinar today, all about Sentinel best practices from the field. And I apologize in advance because Sentinel in 60 minutes is a combination that's very hard. So you will get my slides afterwards and also the recording to follow up. And also, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn if you have further questions after that. So very quick intro from my side. My name is Dominik. I'm working as a security cloud solution architect at Microsoft. So which means I'm helping customers deploy our security solution, not only Sentinel, but also Defender for Cloud or Microsoft 365 Defender. All right, and then we are going to start. And a quick agenda for today's session is overview about Microsoft Sentinel, architecture considerations. A very important point also is number 2, so cost considerations, which is very, very important for a SIEM solution as well. Then we're going to discuss access control, management, and some feature availability and further resources, which I'm talking about today, where you can have a look at it, read it afterwards, and get familiar with all that stuff. All right. For those who are not aware of Microsoft Sentinel, Sentinel is a cloud-native SIEM, SOAR, TI solution. You don't need any kind of infrastructure. You don't need any kind of license. And we have multi-cloud and multi-platform connections available. So it's a SIEM, SOAR, UEBA, and TI, which I'm going to talk about in this session in more detail. And it's also interesting. So you can also put to the chat which kind of SIEM you're using today, and or if you are not having a SIEM, if you're planning to use a SIEM, that would be also very good to know. Pre-deployment checklist. Of course, if you are deploying a SIEM and SOAR solution, you definitely need to identify and prioritize your use cases. We need to be aware of the ingestion cost and also what kind of budget we do have. We need a deployment team who is helping us to set up all that data connectors, all that logs, the architecture, and so forth. We need to design our workspaces, and we need, of course, enable Microsoft Sentinel features. Microsoft Sentinel is entirely powered by Azure Monitor and Log Analytics Workspace. So in a nutshell, what is Azure Monitor? We have different kind of sources. It may be applications, infrastructure, AWS, GCP, Alibaba, cloud solution, also custom sources. You might want to run your own Python script, collect logs from your own applications. All that stuff can be collected and then differentiated between metrics like performance metrics, application metrics, insights. You definitely want to see how is your online shop going, how many unique visits per month you have with that online shop. And we can also collect logs, not only security logs, but also performance logs, insight logs. So if you want to see the performance overall of your applications and resources, all that stuff can be collected and then be visualized, analyzed, respond, and integrated to third-party apps as well, like ticket systems, ServiceNow, Jira, Cherwell, etc. All right, and first and most important stuff is the architecture decision and all that architecture view of Microsoft Sentinel. Let's start with tenancy considerations. So as I mentioned before, the Log Analytics Workspace is the central data storage for your security logs. Our best practices in the recommendation is to use a centralized Log Analytics Workspace where all logs are stored in a central place, independently of how many subscriptions you have, how many tenants you have. That's also the most easiest deployment method. There might be a reason, and we are going to talk later about this, where you need to deploy different and designated workspaces to store logs. One good example is that you need to be aware of data compliance and privacy. So for example, you are not allowed to ingest data from Europe to your workspace in the US or vice versa. All that data privacy discussions could lead into multiple workspaces at the end. And hybrid means we connect centralized and decentralized workspaces, so it's a mix and combination of both of them. Best practices when designing your workspace. So we also have a decision tree. This is linked to the workspace, and it's very easy. So the first and most important one, keep it simple. So a tenant with hundreds of different workspaces makes it very, very complex. For an overview, also you are having less control over costs and the reasons why you're ingesting logs to this workspace and not to this one. If you are a Microsoft Defender for Cloud customer, definitely use the same workspace because you get a bunch of very cool benefits which saves you cost. I will also talk about this later. If you want to encrypt your entire Log Analytics workspace with bring your own key, so this is definitely possible, you can use a dedicated cluster as well. The requirement for a dedicated Log Analytics cluster is 500 gig ingestion per day. and then you can combine them. So for example, if you have 10 workspaces, and of that 10 workspaces, you're ingesting each 50 gig, you can combine them to a cluster, which gives you a pricing benefit and bring your own key encryption capabilities. This is the most easiest, and I hope the majority of the audience have that model in place. So single tenant, single region. This is very straightforward. So there is a SOC team in the Contoso tenant, and in one resource group, we have the log analytics workspace deployed and Sentinel attached. So this is the best and easiest scenario. Unfortunately, not every big customer is using that model because of some regulations and technical reasons. But if you can do this, this would be the best option for you. Single tenant, multiple regions. So you definitely can ingest data across regions to your Sentinel workspace. It really doesn't matter. You can move data from VMs hosted in US West to the log analytics workspace and Sentinel to the European Union. Another option is you have multiple tenants and a single region. So on the left side, we have the Contoso tenant with a resource group where Sentinel resides. And on the right side, we have the Wingtip tenant and another resource group where Sentinel resides. This is also the requirement. So you definitely, if you want to connect two tenants, each tenant needs their own Sentinel instance. The good thing, if you are having multiple tenants and you want to have a single pane of glass, you can connect both tenants for free with Azure Lighthouse, and then you can control and see all incidents in one place. You can publish analytic rules in one instance. You can say, hey, that threat analytic or threat hunting rule should be deployed to this tenant in that workspace. It's also possible with our new workspace manager tool. So single view, single management pane across multiple tenants and multiple regions. Multiple tenants and multiple regions, it's definitely totally the same. So you might have in the Wingtip tenant, a resource group in Azure, a resource group in the European Union, and one region in the other tenant for the Contoso organization. You can also use Azure Lighthouse and Workspace Manager, combine that stuff, and have a single view, single management pane across your entire Sentinel instances. For those of you who are MSSPs, or for those of you who are thinking about, I want to outsource my SOC to a managed SOC partner, this could be Microsoft itself, this could be a lot of Microsoft partners as well. You can also control access with Azure Lighthouse. So for example, in that picture, you can see the MSSP team, which is managing your SOC. You can grant access to only the resource group US East, and the MSSP is then can then respond and analyze your threats within their own tenant or their managing tenant. But you can also gain access to the entire subscription, including your entire Sentinel instances across the world, and the MSSP will then get access to the entire subscription, entire tenant, and manage those stuff in their managing MSSP tenant. So this is also possible with Azure Lighthouse and Microsoft Sentinel. Configure workspace settings. So very, very important here. The data retention, if you create a workspace setting, is by default 30 days, but you will definitely get 90 days free if Sentinel is attached. So if you create a workspace, make sure to change the retention to 90 days because it's free anyway, and you have a more data retention time to analyze your logs. Also very important, workspace audit logging is not enabled by default. So if you want to know which query was run by whom, what tool was being used, if there's an API access to your log analytics workspace, you need to enable the workspace audit logging as well. And playbook permissions, of course, if you want to use SOAR, security orchestration automated response, you definitely need to assign permissions to those resource groups, because playbooks are based on logic apps, and not every logic app is allowed to do read, write, delete operations for your automations. That's why you need to configure playbook permissions for your resources as well. And on the right side, there is also a description how you are doing this in your tenant or in your customer's tenant. Data connectors. This is the next step, what you're doing, because you want to collect logs, you want to connect your data sources, and you want to then analyze all those logs. So we have a bunch of native data connectors. This is pretty straightforward. All of them are Microsoft products. You can easily just click on connect, and data from that various products on the right side will then flow into your Sentinel instance. But that's not all. Of course, you can also connect with AMA, Azure Monitoring Agent, your virtual machines independently where they are hosted. Could be on premises, in any cloud. Any cloud doesn't matter. You can connect those machines as well. There might be the need to integrate TI, third-party tools, and other vendors. So, for example, if you want to leverage the TI intelligence of CrowdStrike, if you want to use the TI intelligence of Palo Alto with PAN-OS, so they have a very good Whitefire logs, for example, you definitely can connect those TIs into your Sentinel as well, and also automate that stuff, which means if Palo Alto has an IOC that says, hey, this IP address is constantly brute forcing our appliances, you can then configure Sentinel that those TIs will automatically be added to Sentinel, and you can then do block operations, whatever you prefer, directly from Sentinel on your PAN-OS firewalls. There's more, because on-premises and infrastructure as a service environment, you can use Logstash. That's a native plugin we have in Microsoft Sentinel to collect that stuff. You can use Elastic, whatever you prefer, but you can also use our standard logs and connectors like syslog, common event format, or Windows event forwarding. You can connect either it's through a public connectivity to Log Analytics workspace, or you can use a private connection, which means you can deploy a Log Analytics gateway. This is a kind of site-to-site VPN where you have a private connection from your on-premises organization to the Microsoft Sentinel workspace. And of course, we have IoT, OT, a lot of integrations here as well. Some of them are native because we have Defender for IoT in our product portfolio. But here again, it doesn't matter which data sources you have, as long as they provide any kind of API where you can get those logs, you will bring it into Sentinel. You may now ask, okay, what stuff do I need to connect first? And if you're a Microsoft 365 customer or Microsoft Defender customer, it definitely makes sense to use that stuff, because some of them are also free of charge. So for example, Azure Activity is completely free, independently of how many gigs you're ingesting. All security alerts and incidents from Defender products, Defender for Cloud, IoT, etc., are also free. So you definitely can start with the integrated products at no additional cost, connect Sentinel, and then get a hands-on experience on what Sentinel is and how does it works. This is also very cool. And we will talk about Fusion and UEBA now. Sentinel is not only a static signature analyzing tool, so we have daily more than 45 trillion signals that come into our security researchers team and environment. So that means we are analyzing 45 trillion signals daily, and then we are making sure that only the most important stuff is coming to the customer's environment as well. And with that knowledge and that TI logs, we have the capability to tune the machine learning algorithm as well. And user and entity behavior analytics means actually, if someone logs into a Tor network, this is just an event, but it doesn't mean that this person is trying to do something malicious. There is also something on the last day prior vacation, this employee wants to or deletes 100 SharePoint documents. So this is also an event, but it also doesn't mean it is something malicious. And user and entity behavior will analyze the user behavior and then also provides you suggestions how to run analytic rules. Is this something important we need to monitor? Why does this user logs on to Tor networks and then deletes data? Could be something malicious. And that's a very, very good benefit you have with UEBA because it applies also to on-premises Active Directory environments. And in the future, we will also connect other identity tools like Okta, Ping, AWS, and all that stuff. It's very, very great to see this and to have this. Then anomalies. So we have predefined anomalies. This is also very, very cool because it says anomalous Azure AD sign-in session. So if a user has risky sign-ins, impossible travel sign-ins, all that stuff that comes around, you can also tweak that machine learning algorithm and say, hey, if the user travels across countries within 3 hours, then please send an incident or create an incident. This can be tweaked by yourself. And we have Microsoft Sentinel Fusion. Fusion means that's a multi-stage attack mechanism because we are actually checking all analytic rules from all alerts and then combine them into the Fusion machine learning algorithm to get access to the multi-stage attack. A very simple example is there is a brute force attack from an Australian IP address against your Palo Alto firewalls. And there was a successful attempt brute forcing the Palo Alto firewalls, and then we have, or the attacker has access to the internal network resources. What we are now doing with Fusion is we are using the alert from Palo Alto data source and the data source from your file share for your Windows server, for example. And then we will correlate the data and show you the entire kill chain for that cyber attack into in Microsoft Sentinel. So this is also a very, very interesting feature, and you can control and also modify Fusion on your own. So mapping entities, for example, and combining different analytic rules for Fusion. Enable analytic rules. So we recently, I believe it was last week, announced that the new Content Hub will be the source of truth. So the Content Hub, you will have predefined analytic rules for more than 400 out-of-the-box solutions, not only Microsoft, also a lot of third-party solutions. You can enable those Content Hub capabilities and then apply analytic rules, automatically enable them, use our recommendations for remediation and automation rules, and also use workbooks for visualize the data. And the most important thing is that we also have a MITRE map in Microsoft Sentinel. So this allows you to see the coverage. So we have the entire MITRE attack framework. And if you are saying, okay, there is a data exfiltration, and you can actually see if you are covered for data exfiltration or not. And we also then provide suggestions which analytic rules should be enabled for that specific MITRE technique that you are being covered and can monitor data exfiltration within your organization. In addition, we also have a very comprehensive GitHub repository. So this is not only Microsoft's developed rules or content, but also very, very much stuff from the community as well. So this is, it's definitely worth a look because there are many, many things you can do here. Visualizing data and hunt for threats. So we have workbooks, and workbooks allows you to give specific access to your management. So for example, if they want to analyze the SOC efficiency for specific incident owners or for specific very, very complex incidents like multi-stage incidents, you can use workbooks and then also share those workbooks, export it to PDF, give specific permissions to them. And we also have a section for recommended workbooks that you definitely need to have a look on this. It's a very, very good visualization. And the best thing about workbooks is it's all based on custom query language, and you can modify each query within the workbook directly. So for example, if you want to switch the time frame from 30 days to 90 days, it's just a click, change the number 30 to 90, click on save, and you have modified the workbook for additional usage. Automation is key because no one wants to get up in the middle of the night and then solve any complex incidents. So really the goal should be that you can automate around 60% of your entire SOC. So, and with Microsoft Sentinel, you can actually use playbooks which are based on logic apps. We have also more than 200 built-in predefined playbooks for automation that can be used out of the box. You just need to enable it, not only for Microsoft products, but also for third-party products. And this gives you a very good overview how to get started with automation and how to respond to threats and to get started with it. Of course, you can use also automation rules if there is false positives, benign positives, and all that stuff. You can use automation rules if you want to get informed into your ticket system. If an incident happens, you can send incidents to your Microsoft Teams via email, etc., whatever you prefer. Cost considerations, and this is also very, very important, and there are very cool tips and tricks here in that section as well, because we have a very, very new tiering model in Microsoft Sentinel. And the first one we need to discuss, this is something we published this week, I believe, during Microsoft Inspire. In the previous model, and this is what you can see on the slides, we have two pricing options for Microsoft Sentinel and Log Analytics. So actually you need to combine that number with that number, and this is the daily price for Sentinel and Log Analytics. So we combine them to a single pricing model. You don't need to calculate Sentinel and Log Analytics separately as you need to do it previously. So this is something we simplified, and you can now calculate it in much, much more easier with a single pane of glass for the entire cost for Microsoft Sentinel. So yeah, where you can save costs in Sentinel and in Sentinel, and within the Sentinel workspace, only ingest security logs. This is very, very important. And you can use a wide range and variety of filtering capabilities that we are going to talk as well. Definitely focus on the most important logs and don't ingest any kind of audit logs or performance logs, application insight logs that are not necessarily needed for your SOC team. Be aware that egress costs can be there as well. So if you are having VMs in the US and you are ingesting data from that VMs from the US to Europe, you need to pay egress costs as well. So definitely also consider if it's cheaper to create a workspace in the other region instead of having that egress costs as well. Retention. So 90 days is free within Sentinel, but we have new retention tiers that you can use for a much, much, much lower cost as well in Microsoft Sentinel. But, and there's also an overview later, you can also send logs to Azure Data Explorer, to blob storage accounts, to Event Hub, and use a kind of cold storage model for long-term data retention, which is also much more cheaper than the hot storage within Microsoft Sentinel. Yeah, of course, you can shut down machines. So this is not related to Sentinel, but general recommendations and egress costs that we are going to talk about later as well. Ingestion planning. So collection is not detection, and I can really, this is very important. So only focus on security events and use filtering capabilities, because some event types might occur very often per day and some might not. And you definitely can filter out all that unnecessary or unneeded logs that are not relevant for your SOC team. So filtering, how does that work? In a nutshell, Azure Monitoring Agent is being used for infrastructure as a service. Resources like VMs, and Azure Monitoring Agent enables you to filter events. So you can say, I want only security events from my Windows servers between 1000 and 2000 ingested to the workspace. You definitely can do this. You want to have logs from that Windows machines, only security events in workspace A for Sentinel, and you want to have performance logs in another workspace for performance monitoring, like SCOM or analyzing it for your server admin teams. You can do this as well. If you want to just have one single event ID from one specific server and the other event ID from another server, you can do this as well. So AMA, the agent, is you can use multi-homing, multi-destination for both Windows and Linux clients. Yeah. Also, very cool built-in feature is ingestion time transformation. So what does that actually mean? And I will go one slide further here. We have a predefined workflow for our standard logs. So that means the security event table in Microsoft Sentinel, you can imagine we are ingesting security events from Windows Server there. This is a predefined workflow and can be used in standard tables. But what you can use here as well, you can definitely also define output tables. So you can say event ID 1234 from that specific domain controller should flow into the standard table security events. And then you can say event ID 5678 should flow into a custom table because I want to have a longer retention for that specific table. The cool thing here is also that you can change the retention on a table basis. So you don't need to retain the entire workspace. You can also just select single tables and say, hey, that table should be retained 1 year, 5, or up to 7 years. And this is directly available in the portal. So you can create a data collection rule. You can define which data should flow into which workspace and also do the filtering immediately in the Microsoft Sentinel portal. Threat hunting, of course, you can search across all your data. And this is very important for these 3 different Sentinel tiers, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, because you can investigate historical data, use forensic data, and we have a lot of big data and native integrations as well to analyze those data. And also maybe you want to put your own machine learning algorithm for data that's being stored outside of Sentinel. This is also be possible. So this log analytics tier is the default tier. And this means we have full crystal query language support, 90 days is included, and we have a max retention of 2 years. And overall, this analytic tiers costs you 10 cents per gigabyte per month. This is the default one. You have the entire capabilities in Microsoft Sentinel and in the log analytics workspace. But what you can do as well, and this is also not limited to the entire workspace, you can do this for each individual table. Right out of the box, you can just say, hey, this table or this kind of logs should be be moved to basic logs. And basic logs is being used for very, very noisy logs that do not have value or many great value for running analytic rules, but it might be very important for forensics. So for example, VPN logs, proxy logs, VPC flow logs, all that stuff could be stored in basic logs to a much more cheaper price and only for forensic reasons, because basic logs do not support analytic rules. It's just for manually query that data and maybe correlate it with some other data in your normal Sentinel tier. In the last one, we have the data archive tier, so which is 2 cents per gigabyte per month. We have limited KQL query, which is totally sufficient for checking a user account or some specific logs. You don't need to be a KQL expert, so you can just type in different strings like usernames, UPN, IP addresses, and then we search across all 3 different tiers. If there is a result, you can also with a single click say, hey, I want to restore the data or just specific data, and then analyze it in the full KQL log analytics tier. And data retention gives you a good capability to store data up to 7 years for a lower price. Yeah, and this is the overview again. So this is the normal log analytics workspace with 90 days retention included. You can also say, I want to export or move data from the log analytics to Azure Data Explorer because you have you need an unlimited retention or more than 7 years. This is something you can do. You can also export it to any kind of Azure blob storage, on-premises storage accounts, whatever you prefer. And this is the built-in archive feature you can use within Microsoft Sentinel. So this gives you a comparison about long-time retention needs and also to have a cost overview about that data storage. So bandwidth, and this is very, very interesting. So first, the cool info and the best info is if you are configure diagnostic logs for pass resources, which means Azure Firewall, Kubernetes storage accounts, and you want to have that security data in Microsoft Sentinel, diagnostic settings don't have egress costs. So as an example, there is an Azure Firewall deployed in Australia, and you want to have the Azure Firewall security logs ingested to your Sentinel instance in Europe. There's no bandwidth, no egress cost. You definitely can do this for all diagnostic settings resources that you want to use. It looks a little bit different for VMs because in that example, we have 1,000 VMs in the US and we have 1 gig per day bandwidth costs for that data ingestion across US to Europe. And the bandwidth egress cost in Azure between regions is 5 cents per gigabyte, which leads into $1,500 per month only for egress costs. So it's not a big deal for that amount of VMs. But if you want to save $1,500 per month only because of egress costs, you can then create your log analytics workspace in the US as well and store those data locally to avoid cross-region egress costs within the Azure environment. If you are a Microsoft Defender for Cloud customer, and the most important one is security event in Windows Firewall, so those qualifying tables allow you to ingest 500 megs per day per server for free into your Sentinel workspace. It doesn't matter how many workspaces you have. If we have 10 workspaces, this benefit is valid for all 10 workspaces and not only for one. And another cool information here is that it doesn't matter, for example, if one machine just sends 100 megs and the other machine sends 800 megs, it will calculate it against the entire number of machines multiplied with the 500 meg free ingestion. So that means actually if we have 1000 VMs and the overall ingest, or let's use 100 VMs, that's easier to calculate, which is then 5 terabyte per day. I'm sorry. Yeah, 5 terabyte per day is free independently if one machine is sending 4 terabyte and the other 99 machines are sending 1 terabyte. It counts against the overall number of logs that are being sent from your Microsoft Defender for Cloud machines, actually. This will also save you a lot of money. And the most important thing you need to consider is use the same workspace for Sentinel and Microsoft Defender for Cloud. And this limit or this free benefit will be applied automatically to your environment. Another benefit is if you are a Microsoft E5 customer, it could be E5 security, it could be F5, A5, G5. Really doesn't matter. It don't need to be the entire E5 suite. You can actually get 5 megabyte per day per user for those additional logs as well. So advanced hunting data means raw logs, device info, device network events, all that stuff. And you can also track the costs in workbooks. This is very, very cool because you can see on each table which amount of data ingestion happened and how many free benefit you have, actually. This is also visible in the workbook. There are a lot of cost management resources that you can have a look at it. Also, the Microsoft Defender for Cloud 500 meg allowance, the E5 customer, how much does that playbook cost? And also, this is the workspace usage report where you can see the costs on a table level basis and including the benefit. Access control. Let's go through this very, very quickly. We have a lot of Microsoft built-in roles where you can get access to Microsoft Sentinel. First and most important one is subscription level role-based access control. In that scenario, server admins, SOC team, and Office 365 administrators have access to the entire subscription, which means they can see the performance logs here, which is important for the server admins, and all of them can see security logs within the Microsoft Sentinel workspace. This is something you probably might avoid because not everyone should see security logs because it contains IP addresses, UPNs, and some incident data as well, of course. You can also scope it to a resource level role-based access control. So for example, server admins are only allowed to see performance logs in the log analytics workspace, which is being used for the administration. And only the SOC team and the Office 365 admin team is allowed to see Microsoft Sentinel security data. So you can scope it on a resource level as well. And last but not least, we have also table level role-based access control. And it looks more complicated than it is because for the server admins, as an example, they only have access, for example, to read or to query or to write for performance logs. And the SOC team and the Office 365 team is only able to see security logs. You can then define, okay, this team is able to read security data from the workspace. The other team is able to query data, to write data, etc. So, and the same is true for each specific table in your Microsoft Sentinel workspace. So you can define very, very granular on each table what kind of activities does your team or is your team allowed to do. So read, write, query, delete, update, all that stuff here in specific tables. Those are the built-in roles we have actually. So you can use that. And of course, if you're aware of Azure and the entire identity and access management infrastructure, you can also use custom roles and say, hey, this role should be combined with my custom role or any other role. And you can then say only specific permissions for specific resource groups and tables should be combined with a custom role and used by my SOC team. Also, some best practices. Playbooks automate response. If you can remember on the first or second slide, you need to grant access, or you need to grant playbooks permissions to specific resources. Please do this with managed identities. It could be either system assigned managed IDs. It's the best approach because if you delete a resource, actually, for example, if the VM, or if you want to respond and remediate threats on a specific VM, and you're using managed identities, the managed identities only lives that long as the resource itself. So which means if you delete the VM, the managed identity will be deleted as well. You follow least privilege and you don't have tons of managed identities in your environment. And because you need also to be aware of that and track them, delete them afterwards, etc. So managed identities for granting playbook permissions would be the best practices approach. Depending on the data source you want to connect. So for example, if you want to connect Office 365, of course, you need permissions to connect Office 365. If you want to connect Defender, you need security admin role or global admin role. Independently of what data source you want to connect, there are some specific additional permissions that might be needed for connecting data and then read the data. Yeah, and as mentioned, so you definitely can use custom roles. You can bind all those built-in roles. You can put single permissions to your custom role and apply it to specific users within your admin or SOC team. This is the normal approach. What you can do with other resources today as well, very straightforward, and then just use it either on subscription level, resource level, or table level. Yeah, some other permissions you need. So there's a link in it. You can just click on the slides and then use that for your reference. Also, you might think about it, okay, how do I manage all that stuff? Analytic rules. So there's a new analytic rules. We have 100 new analytic rules. We have different tenants, different customers, different workspaces. Microsoft Sentinel is entirely integrated in CI/CD processes. You can either use ARM, Azure Resource Manager templates to provision that stuff. You can connect GitHub and Azure DevOps to your environment. And if you're saying, hey, my private community should be used within my SOC team, I will then put in indicators of compromise to it. I will modify analytic rules. I will create workbooks. You can then directly from that repository say, hey, please publish those analytic rules to this workspace, to this tenant, to this customer, modify analytic rules in a single central place, and then apply it to all your Sentinel instances. So everything is here possible in an automated way. You can connect this in Azure DevOps, in Azure and Microsoft GitHub, or GitHub, and then do this entirely automated. Yeah, this is the overview. So we have support for source controls, GitHub and Azure DevOps. You can use various content types, analytic rules, data connectors, workbooks. So you can create your own repository, use this as a basic reference, and then apply it to your instances. You can do service health monitoring, logging, troubleshooting. If there is a ingestion delay for some reasons, I don't know, if you have a syslog machine and the syslog machine is running on CPU and memory limits, for example, you might see ingestion delays. All of this can also be seen in Sentinel and in your CI/CD environment. And integrations with multi-tenant is Lighthouse and Workspace Manager. If you have workspaces within your single tenant or multiple tenants across different regions, everything can be managed in a single central place. Azure Arc, very important for infrastructure as a service. If you haven't heard about it, Azure Arc enables you to link actually your machines outside of Azure, independently where they are. It could be cloud or on premises. So Azure itself, and then you can also apply Azure policies, ARM templates, use guest configuration policies to run PowerShell scripts, all that stuff. And for Microsoft Sentinel, you have the option either to connect all servers to Azure Arc that are not hosted in Azure, or you can say, I want to just use a Windows event forwarding, syslog forwarder, any kind of collection machine you want to use, or are you preferring to use? Because then only this specific forwarding machine needs Azure Arc, and then all other connected machines will report to those Arc connected machine, and the Arc connected machine is responsible for sending logs to your Microsoft Sentinel workspace in the cloud. And this is how it works with the Azure monitoring agent that's being installed on the Azure Arc machine. So we already talked about it. You can define very, very granular what data should be flow into performance logs. And by the way, if you're a SCOM customer or SCCM customer, those agents can be used in parallel as well. So no need to use an extra or another agent for SCOM or SCCM. You can use one agent and say, I want to collect security and performance logs on premises via SCOM, and only specific events should be sent to Sentinel for security reasons, one single agent for all capabilities. And yeah, you can filter that stuff. You can predefine, you can use predefined logs and say, hey, I want to collect all security events. I only want event ID with specific event ID numbers. And you can then move it to all different and log analytics workspaces with different event IDs. So last but not least, before we go into the questions, because we only have 8 minutes left, feature availability. So everything is actually available, what I'm told you today, but you need to be aware of some limits we currently have. So for example, if you have more than 100 tenants, I hope that's not the case. So you can use cross workspace queries for more than 100. So actually you would need to split it up. You definitely, if you have multiple workspaces, there is a single incident view, a single hunting capability across workspaces, and you can use Azure Lighthouse and Workspace Manager for the multi-tenant management stuff. Also, a lot of resources. What's new in Microsoft Sentinel? Because it feels like every month we are publishing 100 new features. So how to extend Sentinel across workspaces and tenants, different ingestion tiers, best practices for managing costs, and also permissions, how you can scope and give your SOC and server team access to specific logs within Microsoft Sentinel. All right, fantastic. So thank you so much for that very, very short hour of introducing Microsoft Sentinel and some best practices from the field. And now we are up for questions. So you can, Laura, can the audience unmute themselves, or shall I just go through the chat? Let me quickly see the chat here. Yeah, any questions from the audience? So you can also unmute yourself if you want, or just write the question to the chat.
Thanks, Dominik, for a great presentation.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Brilliant. So there's just a couple of questions in here, so I will just fly through them. So the first one is, what are the key features that differentiate Microsoft Sentinel from other SIEM solutions in the market?
Yeah, very good question. So actually, Microsoft Sentinel is cloud native. You don't need any kind of infrastructure. You don't need licenses. It's built in with many other Microsoft tools as well. And we have, as I mentioned, we have more than 8,500 security researchers that take care about TIs, what's going on in the wild. all that intelligence, all that data flows into our products. And with that massive amount of data and researchers team, we want to make our customers more secure. So that's probably the key benefit of Microsoft Sentinel.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Dominik. And then another question here is, which deployment method would be most suitable for small and medium-sized organizations?
Yeah, definitely use a single central log analytics workspace, apply Sentinel to it, and then start small, as I showed you in the slide. So connect sources that you already have, start with connecting sources that are free of charge, get familiar with the product. It gives you a very, very good overview about what's going on in your environment. You will see stuff that you have never seen before because it will correlate your data across your different sources, VPN logs, firewall logs, Office 365 logs. Keep it simple, start small, and then it's not a sprint, it's kind of marathon. So configure and manage a SIEM solution.
Brilliant, that's great. Thanks, Dominik. And there's just another question then here. So someone wants to know, is there a limit to the amount of data that can be processed and stored within Microsoft Sentinel? How does it handle large-scale data environments?
Yeah, so Microsoft Sentinel is a PaaS solution, so platform as a service, and we are handling the scale up and scale down activity for you, of course. So there's no limit in kind of ingesting data. You can ingest 10 terabyte per day, and you will have the same experience as you would with only ingesting 100 gigs per day. There's no additional costs for the scale up and scale down. The pricing is entirely based on ingestion. So as more as you ingest, as more as you pay, of course. And if you're ingesting more data, you can also use a commitment here, because then you will get some specific discounts. This can be changed every month on your own in the Microsoft Sentinel overview, but no limit in case of ingestion. You can ingest as much data as you want.
Brilliant. So that is all the questions that I have here. So I guess we'll wrap up the Q&A session now. And just on behalf of the ESPC community, I just want to extend a huge thank you again to you, Dominik, for taking the time to carry out this webinar. We really appreciate it.
Thank you as well. Thank you for having me today.
Great. So that is the end of today's webinar. You can find this webinar and more at sharepointeurope.com/resource center. That is it for today, guys. Thanks again to everyone for joining us today. Take care, and we hope that you'll join us again. Bye for now.
Thanks, guys. Bye.